When it comes to aspects like immersion and atmosphere in video games, the Bioshock series stands out as one of the greatest of all time. From the unforgettable world of rapture, to a perfect soundtrack that sets the tone, to a general atmosphere of hopelessness and dread, Bioshock stands out as a unique experience in the world of video games. I knew next to nothing about Bioshock before I started my playthrough. I knew there was some dimensional shenanigans with Elizabeth and Infinite, but that was it. No real details. I didn't even know the first two were considered horror games.
Oh, this is a horror game. Oh, I didn't know that.
I am not a fan of horror games, and I'm very open about that fact, and to be honest, had I known these were horror games, I probably would have never touched them in the first place. But despite that, I still loved these games. They blew away all my expectations and gave me an experience that I still look back on regularly. The original Bioshock does a wonderful job of introducing you to the unforgettable world of Rapture, a sunken utopia turned dystopia that will be your home for the next 10 to 12 hours. And I cannot stress enough just how impressive Rapture itself is. It's mysterious, interesting, immersive, and one of the best video game settings I've ever gotten the pleasure to run around in. And it's filled to the brim with slicers, crazed inhabitants, machines, and of course the Big Daddy and Little Sisters. This pairing is a focal point of the first two games, with the Little Sisters being small, harmless collectors of Atom, a currency in the game, and the Big Daddies being their big, tanky protectors. Just hearing the footsteps of one of these hulks never failed to cause a reaction in me, be it excitement or dread. Killing the Big Daddy is no easy task because they have a ton of health and can dish out a lot of damage very quickly. But doing so nets you the Little Sister. You can choose to either kill them or save them, and of course I saved them all because I'm not a monster. And while the daddies are fairly difficult to kill, especially in the early game, the fights never became boring. Between your ever-growing arsenal of perks, guns, and plasmids, this game's form of magics and spells, the fights were almost always different, especially when you take into account how different the environments were, and how those environments are affected by your spells. For example, you have to approach a fight in a frozen wasteland very differently from how you approach a fight in a flooded garden. In one, you might use your fire ability to melt ice and get useful ammo, and in the other, you might use your electric ability to shock the water, and so the enemies in it are stunned and have damage dealt to them. Having the environments play a key role in combat helps the game feel fresh, as your environment is completely changed about every 2 hours, with each chapter having a unique landscape, antagonist, and gimmick. This keeps the game from ever wearing out its welcome and staying captivating for the entire playthrough. As you go from chapter to chapter, you're being egged on by the excellent cast of characters and an intriguing story. All of this comes together to form an experience that is thoroughly entertaining and never lulls or slows down. Now, Bioshock 2 puts you into the shoes of a Big Daddy, something that is still really cool. Instead of being a normal guy, you are the hulking tank that everyone in Rapture fears. The game itself plays out pretty much exactly the same as the first, except this time you have more control over customizing your character, with more perks, and not having the perks restricted to certain slots like they were in the first game. The hacking mechanic has also been overhauled. It's gone from a liquid puzzle to a simple QuickTime event, making hacking much quicker and honestly more enjoyable. I like liquid puzzles, but they get old around the 80th time you do one. Bioshock 2 also keeps you in the wonderfully awful world of Rapture and maintains that incredible level of atmosphere and immersion that the original had, while also continuing to flesh out the story of this aquatic city. The gameplay is very similar to the first. You have a large arsenal of weapons and magic spells that you can use to dispatch all the creepy foes you come across, but this game adds a new and, well, rather unwelcome mechanic to the mix. Now, when you meet a Little Sister, you will have to kill the Big Daddy guarding her, but instead of just hit X for spare or Y for kill and be done with it, now you have to take her a few bodies and wait while she collects the Atom. This whole process takes more than a few minutes, and you have to do it a whole lot throughout the course of the game, and it wears out its welcome fast. However, this game also introduces the Big Sisters. They're a sort of random mini-boss that you have to fight a few times throughout the game. They are introduced with a warning, and then they just spring on you. And they are one of the best parts of the game. You're just minding your own business, looking around, looting, and all of a sudden you're in a boss fight. And a hard one at that. These Big Sisters were the source of most of my deaths throughout the game. Overall, the game is a great expansion of the first. It doesn't do anything revolutionary or change up the formula all that much. It's just more Bioshock goodness. Just like the Banjo-Kazooie series, the first game was phenomenal, while the second takes everything the first did and expands upon it, and then the third game just goes insane! Gone is the underwater city of Rapture, and instead we are graced with the skyward city of Columbia. While brighter and a bit more inhabited and upbeat at times, it doesn't have the same lasting impact that Rapture did. The area is so over the top with Americana and steampunk aspects that it almost feels generic. And the same can be said about the gameplay. Gone are the days when you could hold 8 weapons at a time, now you're restricted to only 2. And most of the player upgrades are gone. Instead, they're replaced with weapon and spell-specific upgrades. And to me, this watered down the whole experience. It took away what made the first 2 games more unique. And the minute-to-minute gameplay changed as well, becoming more of a first-person shooter with immersive sim elements, rather than an immersive sim with first-person shooter elements. This game also does away with all the iconic baddies like the Splicers and the Big Daddies. You spend your time in Columbia fighting generic guards in one-color uniforms. Now, while stripping away layers of the gameplay, the game tries to make up for this with the story, but for me that also kind of fell flat. It felt needlessly complex for the sake of being complex, with the last 30 minutes being a giant monologue by the devs in an attempt to blow the players' minds that fell flat for me. It's telling that the best and most memorable part of the game was the 5 minutes you spent in Rapture. That world was just so fascinating, and seeing it after spending many hours in the sky was a welcome return that didn't last nearly long enough. I'm glad I went into this series as blind as I did. I didn't know what to expect, and if I had, I probably wouldn't have ever tried it in the first place. Bioshock 1 and 2 blew me away, and while I wasn't a huge fan of Infinite, it was still an enjoyable time, just not as much as the first 2. Rapture's a truly unforgettable world, and one that I hope we see devs learn from in the future. Building immersive and fascinating worlds to explore is something that can only really be done in video games, and I want to see more of it done to the level of excellence that Bioshock had.